Great. If so we'll let her join us as she comes in a little bit later, but let's go ahead and get started. We'll just burn through this really quick. I want you to go ahead and stop me at any time if you have any questions ever about anything that we're going through. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yep, I
All right, we're going to burn through this then really quick since it's
can
just
hear
you.
you fine.
Okay, ready? All right, guys, here we go. Welcome back. I'm glad everybody is here with us. We're going to be doing the same thing that we've been doing, continue along these learning objectives about understanding really the foundational concepts around the CSBG network, primarily focusing on those organizational standards and the results-oriented management and accountability principles and practices. And as we go through this ROMA cycle and the org standards and performance management, we're really going to talk about how they all work together and how they all it just all magically works together. It's pretty well thought out that way. So on ROMA, again, it's results oriented and management accountability. And what we're going to be covering in this final series is the observation and reporting of our results and the analysis and the evaluation of our programming. So as we get here, we're right back with our ROMA wheel again. So far in our series, we've talked about the assessment phase where we look at all the available data in our agencies, in our communities, and in our served populations. And this is the data where we then use to determine what our levels of need are and how we're going to go about planning our resources, our strategies, and our services, and how we're going to go ahead and meet those needs. In the next phase, the board has less to do with the execution of the oversight and the actual carrying out of the work. And this is where the board really starts to entrust the work to the leadership, the management, and the staff to do all the work and meet the goals and the objectives of the plan that we made in our last phase. And while the board may not be as involved in the day-to-day part of these operations, they still carry a very important role in ensuring that they're holding the agency accountable for all the steps, the work, the collection of the data, and the information. And as a board, you guys are going to sit together and review those financial and programming reports, along with any feedback from customers and stakeholders in the community as to how the agency is operating. So while the agency is reporting on the progress, you as the board are observing and evaluating the outcomes to ensure that everything is going to be going according to plan. So let's take a look at what that process actually looks like. So we're going to put the plan into action and really take a look at what the role of the board is. So there are no organizational standards really related to the agency's provision of services at the individual and family level, or at strategies at the community level and the agency level. But it is clear, and the feds and the state office make it really clear that the delivery of high quality services is expected, and that the expectation of the achievement of results, and that we're doing this at a level that provides outcomes. This is what's expected out of us. And while the staff is meeting daily with clients and each other to achieve those results, there are things that the board can be doing to support that work. So making sure that there are policies around gift cards, procurement of supplies, telework, sick leave, making sure that you're asking them to do something if you're asking them to do something, that they have the necessary resources or they're able to get the training and equipment they need to be successful. None of us like unfunded mandates. So make sure as a board, we're giving them the tools to be successful. We are also going to look Why do I feel like we're on the wrong one? When we're talk about the tools that are necessary to do the job successfully, we're talking about a plan that can be achieved within the resources of the agency, or making sure that the board at least has a plan to make sure that the agency can get those resources to obtain agency capacity. So for every service or strategy in the plan, a number of factors related to that capacity of the agency are going to come into play. So things like staff, how many staff are going to be needed? Where the location of these activities going to take place? How long are these activities going to be? What are the costs? What are the partners that we're going to use in our community? All of those things come into the implementation of our plan. And it also has to do with the quantity. So the frequency, the intensity, the duration, and also the quality of the programming in which the agency is engaged. All of these things are going to be decided by you, the board of directors, in consultation with management, and then communicated through policies and procedure manuals. So action plans require us to ask questions like, are there going to be budget issues that are going to have to be addressed? Do we need bigger facilities? Do we need more facilities in different locations? Do we need mobile locations? And that's a question that comes up a lot in rural Wyoming, particularly in Christina, in your county, right? You have the largest landmass county in the state. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's a big deal. Are we looking at having to put mobile locations or traveling food pantries, or do we need to go to pavilion? Do we need to go onto the reservation? Are we partnering with the right people to make sure that the people who are needing our services are able to reach us? So a lot of times, like I would say, when I was in a community action agency, we would want to do a class. Well, we didn't have the space in our agency to do that. So we would have to seek out a partner. And a lot of times it was our faith based partners that would be like, can we use your church basement to have a class? Because I don't have a place where I can seat 25 people for a parenting class, or I don't have a place where I can sit 10 people for a lunch and learn. So we have to, as a board, really look and say, well, here's our plan, here's what we're going to do, but how are we going to be able to find the resources to be able to host this? So, we got to look at budgets. Are we budgeting enough for the materials, for the supplies? If we're going to do this program, what new training are we going to need for the staff? And then quality issues have to be addressed by the board as well, deciding what do we want to know about our services? How well are we delivering them? Are we efficient in those services? Are we effective? And how do we know that? How are we going to know when we're doing the job right? Do we have well-defined quality measures? So those are all things before we even open the door that the board is going to take a really big role in helping consult with the staff and management to say, here's our plan. We think this is doable, but how are we actually going to implement it? So there are other questions that we're going to need to know before we open the door. And when we were creating that strategic plan, we already talked about how many customers we thought we might be able to serve with the resources we had available to us. But now we got to have a plan to make sure we get the response to the services we're offering, right? So once the staff is ready to start your service, how are they going to get that out to the customers? How are you going to get the customers there? Does the board understand who they are? Who are the customers we're going after? Who is the target population that we're expecting to serve? And how are we going to talk to them? How are we going to reach them? How are they going to know what we are offering? Do we have a good understanding of what eligibility we need to know or need to have to assure that they qualify? And then how many again do we expect to serve? So remember when we were back in the planning phase, you, or maybe it was the staff, considered this question. Well, now it's time to take a closer look. Because now we're going to be taking into account the resources for the program, the expected cost of the program, and providing the services. And that combined with, do we have enough room for all these people? Do we need to find a new place to have this service? Is there a place where they can access us? Is it dark? Is it walkable? Is it on a bus stop? Is there a place that is safe for them to be able to go? So once we kind of go through these questions, we look at these things. Do we have enough materials in Spanish? Are we recognizing the native culture enough? Are we addressing any equity barriers or access barriers to make sure everybody feels welcome? Now, once we get there, we want to be targeting a little bit. And when I say target, we're going to look at those numbers again for the number of people who can be served. Again, we've kind of identified that in our planning. We're like, we think we can do around 150 or whatever our numbers were in the plan. Again, we're going to be looking at those a little bit more intently to make sure that those are doable and we can make revisions if we need to. And again, these are policy decisions that the board will make in collaboration with the leadership team. The leadership team may be very experienced and they may come to the board with an already plan in place and say, here's what we think we can do. Here's why we think we should do this. We would like to get some feedback from the board. And in some cases, the board is just like, hey, you guys know best. You guys do whatever you think we should do. And they rubber stamp a plan. And I've seen agencies do it that way. And I guess you could do that. But throughout this series, we've talked about the duty of the board, the responsibility of the board to take on that role of really looking at an agency in a strategic, long-term way to give them the guidance that they need to make sure they have everything they need to be successful. So I'm going to skip the questions really quick. Normally I would give us time for questions. Actually, I can go back to questions. Christine, do you have any questions about what we've talked about so far when it comes into getting ready to open the doors to implement our plan?
Just that I think we're intending on helping like 15 people at the most.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, 155, that'd be wonderful.
I know,
like,
right?
But
that's because you guys looked, and I don't know how long you've been on the board, but that's not unusual. I mean, we talked about that in Laramie County. So Cheyenne, or the Community Action of Laramie County, or CALC, went from an emergency services into an intensive case management. They only work with 15 families as well. But the idea and the goal here is to permanently move 15 households out of poverty and into self-sustainability, which is, when you think about it, it's like, oh, well, I guess that's cool. But over the course of 10 years, we're talking 100 families, so it does take some time, but sometimes it does get a little scary. You're just like, oh, what are we going to do? So it does take a lot of really hard intentional work. But let's talk about that. What are the things that you guys as a board need to consider before Doug can open the doors for business? It is not just a turn and burn process. It takes a lot of intentional work to get there. And one of the first things that you guys do is start deciding on how you're going to measure your work. Because it's real easy for us to set really lofty goals, outcomes, and say, we're going to do this, we're going to change the world, we're going to do all these things. But during the implementation phase, then the rubber hits the road, right? We've got to actually do the work now. And so there's a lot of things that the management and the team that's going to be really doing a lot of the work while the board watches, observes, and then later you're going to hear the reports that Doug brings to you. And it's going to be really useful to be
Mhm.
familiar with some of these terms that you're going to be hearing as Doug reports back to you on the progress of the work that they're doing in the office. So we need to be aware of these different indicators that we're going to be using throughout the process. So in our work, we use the words a lot: indicators, outcomes, and goals. And we use those words, we're going to use these a lot. So I'm going to use these on the logic model that we used from last week. So there's a
Okay.
lot of indicators in this image. So an indicator is a specific, observable, and measurable data point that can be used to show changes or progress a program or a service or activity is making toward achieving a specific outcome or a goal. And so when we
Mhm.
look at that logic model, we have those in our header, right? We have our service activity, we have our outcome. We
Mhm.
also know that our indicators should be based on data that is complete, accurate, timely, reliable, and it should be appropriate to the outcome and useful for program management, right? If we are going to pick a projected indicator, it probably should match up to our desired outcome and the service that we're providing. So in this model, the indicator that we used was the number of clients we expected to serve and the time frame we expected to serve them in. And then we clicked, or we projected the indicator of or the number of consumers that we thought we would serve. We thought that 150 of them or 100% would be successful. And then we clicked the number of consumers, or we selected the number of consumers that actually completed. So these are all one form of a type of an indicator. And another indicator that we'll see in this logic model is what we use to prove an outcome or a service. So in this one, our measurement tool, we say, oh, well, in order to show you that we actually did these things, we're going to collect our CSBG application, our record of our rent payment, and the lease. And that's another indicator that says, see, this is what we use to show you that we actually provided that service. And then our outcome tool, we're going to follow up with that family. And that's another indicator that shows you that we achieved that outcome or that goal. So we're going to see that. You're going to hear that all the time. There are different types of indicators all over the place. Specific to our work, an indicator is going to identify the evidence that indicates the result of the participation in the activity or service. So to indicate an act, sorry, my tongue's getting ahead of me. To identify an indicator, we got to ask ourselves, what would it look like if that participant was to achieve success? How would we know that that participant was successful? What would I see? What would I hear? What would I read that would tell me that this change has happened? And some of these indicators are going to be real easy. It's going to be super straightforward and they're going to be easy to measure. Well, sometimes one indicator is going to be all you're going to need for a clear explanation. You should have at least one. For example, if our goal or our outcome was to have increased school graduation rates, our agreed upon indicator for that outcome of school success is school success. That is increased school graduation rate. We say, boom, graduation rates. That is an indicator of school success. But sometimes agencies that are doing case management, sometimes several indicators are going to be required. So for example, let's say improved parental involvement in school is our goal. That might require several indicators, such as we need to track parents helping with homework. We need to track whether or not parents are communicating with the teacher. We're tracking parents participating in school functions and meetings. All of those things can be counted. We can track those things, right? We've got parents helping with homework. We can track that with a signature. Parents communicating with the teacher, we can track that by emails or in-person visits. We can track parents participating in school functions and meetings by tracking and counting the number of meetings they go to. Another example of this would be increased job skills. Sometimes we have to do a lot around the ability for them to get a job, including specific job training completion, resume building, interview preparation and practice, drug testing, buying new work clothes. There's a lot of different indicators that we can count that are very specific that leads to one outcome or goal, and that is increasing job skills and obtaining a job. So indicators really need to help us be able to, well, again, let's start at the list. There needs to be at least one, but many times there's several of them. And an indicator should be there to be able to help you follow change over time, detect progress, or even lack of progress towards that goal. And if we don't have those, sometimes we're not able to show any of our progress. So setting those intermediate benchmarks really helps us measure that movement toward our final outcome. And we get help doing this. So in 2017, the federal office, in conjunction with agencies all over the United States, established a standardized list, I guess, of what they called national performance indicators for both community level needs and family level needs. And like I said, these are a collection of outcomes that are pretty common to most agencies across the United States. So in addition to agencies being able to establish their own program and agency indicators, staff is also going to be comparing the results of their services and strategies to the standardized list. They're used in Wyoming during our application process, and they're often referred to as mapping. We just call them MPIs for short. Some places call them outcomes, some call them goals. And while I don't like to use them interchangeably, a lot of people do, and it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I'm going to show you an example of what that full list of services with a coordinating MPI looks like. So in this list right here, we know from the federal government that all of these are approved, and this is probably small, you may not be able to see this, but I will get you a copy of this, and all of our community action agencies in Wyoming have them. But this gives you a list of all approved services and a list of common services that are being provided across agencies all across the United States. So let's take a look at the housing services. There are housing payment assistance, eviction prevention services. We can do landlord-tenant mediations. We can do tenant rights education. We can do utility payments, utility arrears payments. We can do temporary housing placements, rental counseling, home repairs. We can do independent living home improvements like ramps or things to help elderly or aging people stay in their homes. So in a situation where we have a lot more two-generational households and we have aging parents moving in with maybe caretakers or children, we can help them make that household more handicapped accessible by using CSBG dollars. So as we're looking at these different services that we can use, we would come down here to these tabs, find the corresponding NPI or National Performance Indicator or goal or outcome, and look at these and see what is a goal that we would want to achieve by doing this. So if we use the example and we provided the service of making their house more handicapped accessible, we could then say, hey, you know what? FMPI 4Z.1, which is the number of individuals who improved physical access in their living space by adding ramps or grab bars, we can say how many people we served in that particular program and who achieved that outcome. So this is kind of some guardrails, I guess, as it were, or ways that we can use these MPIs to help guide our planning services and look at things that are already known and acknowledged and accepted as services that are available through using CSBG funding. But agencies always have the ability to make up their own. So if you see one that has a Z on it, that means that that is an agency that made up an NPI, an outcome, or a goal that was specific to their community. And we can still track it the same way using the number of participants that we served, what our target number was, or what we thought we were going to serve, and the time frame in which we were going to achieve that. So we can do a whole lot of different things. We can do dental screenings. We can do child dental services. We can do community garden activities. We can do helped with prepared meals. Some agencies do this with Meals on Wheels. They can help support Meals on Wheels. A lot of agencies right now are doing a lot of mental health counseling, domestic violence programs, vision screenings, prescription payments. There's a lot of things that we can do, particularly to your specific program, Christina, that will help those 10 to 15 families get all the services they need while they are getting the job skills necessary or the education necessary to bring their family out of poverty. So you can see that there's a wide range of services that we can do to do deep intensive case management with that family to help them remove barriers to what's keeping them in generational poverty. Now, some services that we provide support multiple domains, case management, referrals, transportation, and childcare are things that support multiple domains. By paying for or assisting somebody with childcare, we are allowing them to do several things. There is the ability for them to go to school, the ability for them to go to job, their ability to get medical treatment. Those are just by being able to do a child care subsidy. That means that that opens up time frames or the ability for them to meet multiple goals. So there are services that help support those multiple domains: transportation, child care, case management. Those are all things that we can't just say, well, I'm helping you with transportation because it's going to help you go to school. It actually helps them with so many different things that it's hard to just define it in one thing. So those are what we have to choose from. There are other things that we can do as well. The list of things we can do and are allowable with CSBG funding are a lot bigger than those things that we cannot do with CSBG funding. But in the state of Wyoming, as part of our application and as part of our planning process, the state asks us to do our community action plan, and we go into our mapping sheet. And so when Doug or any other agency goes in to do their application, they're asked to fill this out. And so all the work that the board does through all of the ROMA cycle and in the planning is planned here. So this is your plan to the state. So in this particular agency, they said they're going to do housing. They're going to have a goal or an outcome or the MPI of individuals experiencing homelessness, obtain safe temporary shelter. They feel that they're going to be able to serve 24 individuals. They are going to provide emergency shelter. This is typically, and I know this agency typically is placing them in a hotel for less than 7 days to give them a place to stay during either really bad weather or if they're living in their car. In order to show what type of documentation is in the file, they will have to have a copy of the check used to pay the bill, a signature acknowledging receipt of the service whenever possible, and their local partners are going to be TSA and the local hotels. So this is giving the state the idea like, look, we've thought this through. This is how we're going to provide these services. Here's what we're going to do. So all of theirs are housing, but they're also going to provide some health and social behavioral development for individuals are going to demonstrate improved physical health and well-being, and they're going to do that by helping people pay for physicals. And they figure they're going to be able to do, a TSA, sorry, that's the Salvation Army is their partner on that. They figure they're going to be able to help 10 individuals with physicals. They're going to use funding through their disparities grant and the Salvation Army. They'll be able to pay for prescription payments. But this is just giving you an idea of how they have thought through using the ROMA process to tell the state how they're going to provide services. So any questions about what that looks like? You'll be seeing this if you haven't already.
Yeah, that's great. That is really helpful to see all those details for me
Yeah.
anyway. One of my questions is like there was ones on there of all different services. How do you find the people that can train them to do that? Or there was one on there like the foreclosure classes. I'm like, where
Yeah.
is that? I mean,
Yeah, that's a great
who teaches
question.
that?
Right,
You know,
that's a great question. And that's one of the reasons why we do community needs assessments to really
okay.
evaluate what's going on in our community. Is there
Mhm.
anybody in Riverton or in Lander
Mm,
that does
mhm,
that? Right. So in that particular case, as case managers, and one of the things that CSNO does is we have case management cohorts where we get people from
mhm,
all over the state doing the same work. And we say, hey, I've got this client that needs to know information about foreclosure counseling. What do I do? And
mhm,
somebody from Cheyenne says, oh, here, you need to call Bighorn
mhm,
Home Counseling because they do that. Here's their number. Here's who you're going to ask for. And you can
mhm,
make referrals out. So sometimes we can refer into our community. Sometimes.
mhm,
Sometimes we have to refer outside of our community.
mhm.
In some cases, like Casper, Cheyenne, Sheridan, you can't swing a cat without hitting a nonprofit that does some sort of service.
Oh,
In other
cool.
communities like Torrington or Sundance, you're a one-stop shop. You kind of have to be the skill professional in everything.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that's really, really hard. You kind of have to learn what to do. And so that's when we start relying on our case manager partners across the state and 211.
Mhm,
So we'll call 211 and we'll say, hey, I'm a case manager. I've got a client. Do you know of any resources in my area that I'm not aware of? Or can you
mhm,
help? So that's why we find our cohorts. We talk to each other. We do referrals back and forth to each other. And we're
mhm.
constantly scanning our community to find out who the experts are. Because I
Yeah,
cannot be all things to all people all of the time. So when
I'm
it comes to,
wondering.
yeah, you
Yeah,
can. So what
uh,
do I do when I want to do job training? I
yeah.
don't have time nor the skill set to train people on resume. I reach out to my local workforce development office and I
Mhm,
make a referral there. And I call
okay.
them, they're one of my partners. And I'm going to say, hey, Jamie at Workforce Development, I'm sending a client down there. Sally's coming down here. She's particularly really interested in CNA training. She wants to
Mm,
become a nurse. I've got some funding to help her buy some scrubs. Can you get her lined out? And is there any state funding that can help her go to school? Yeah, okay, let's get her down there. So we
mhm,
talk to each other. I have partners at my local community college in the TRIO program, which a TRIO program, every university and college has one. It's for
mhm.
non-traditional students, right? So they can
Yeah,
help pay for childcare so kids can go to school. Is there a
cool.
barrier that's keeping non-trad students from being able to complete? Yep, it's called TRIO. Do they
Mhm,
need tutoring? I can't tutor. I don't have
mhm,
that skill set. So I connect them with somebody at the university or the college. What's another one? Housing is a big one. Rental and tenant counseling. We have several different agencies across the state that
Mm-hmm.
do. I will make sure, I will call on them, their behalf, get them hooked up, make sure that they're getting that service. Another
Mm-hmm.
one that's really good is we have a huge need for legal aid. So I
Mm-hmm.
get in contact. I know that legal aid has services every other Friday in Sheridan County from 2 to 4 at our courthouse. I make sure I send my people down there when I know they're going to be here. So that's why we talk about our partnerships all the time. CSBG actually calls that linkages. And the
Mm-hmm.
linkage is understanding you can't be all things to all people all of the time. So you better find some partners. So Doug
Mm-hmm.
and I have actually been having some conversations about how do we do that better in Fremont County. It has
Yeah.
been our experience that in Fremont County, there is a huge disconnect between your nonprofits and your faith-based services. Nobody knows what the other people are doing.
Yep.
So we have talked about Snow coming down and doing a facilitated, focused conversation and action step planning for nonprofits to get them communicating better with each other and letting each other know, hey, I specialize in this, come talk to me. And this agency saying, well, we're really good at this. Here,
Mm-hmm.
come talk to me about that. Because, and just an example, in Sheridan, we have the Council of Community Services, or no, Council of Human Services. We have lunch every month. We all go to the senior center. We buy each other, buy our own lunch, or bring brown
Mm-hmm.
bag it, and we just go around the table talking about what's going on in our program and what's coming
Mm-hmm.
up in our community. So those are things that we can do so we can make sure we're not duplicating services, that we don't have 3 agencies doing the same thing. We don't have unlimited money. We have to deploy our resources in the most effective way, and we can't do that without talking to each other.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing that in Fremont County. I'm really super excited about it
Mm-hmm.
because I think Lander and Riverton, they're so close together, but I don't know how much they talk to each other. And then we got Du Bois clear over on the other side. That
Yeah.
what are they doing? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
How can we
Yeah.
support that? So those are some things that we're looking at.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions about our implementation?
What you were saying with the collaboration, that would include any churches that wanted to be involved and how they
Absolutely.
like
Absolutely. Faith-based partners are
yeah.
the biggest partners we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so do they have to leave out any of their gospel message with their trainings that they
Uh-uh.
offer to those deadlines?
If
Or
they take CSBG money
mm-hmm.
directly, they cannot proselytize. But
Okay.
if we are just like, for instance, one of my biggest partners was I can't remember, I can't remember what specific church it was, the Tree of Life Church, I think up here, but they had a program called Ignite. And what they did is they took a whole bunch of their congregation who was just interested in
Mm-hmm.
working with cars, and so we would send them people whose cars needed basic repair but couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So through CSBG funding, we'd buy the parts. And
Cool.
their guys would fix the cars.
That's neat.
It's a perfect relationship. They got
Yep.
to do their ministry, we
Mm-hmm.
got to help, and a person experiencing poverty had a running vehicle so they could
Mm-hmm.
get to work.
Yeah. And a lot of that I can see being like at no expense to CSBG. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah,
A lot of
a lot of
that
it.
just
Absolutely.
here.
Here's another great relationship we had with a social fraternity. So we had the Rotary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rotary's
Mm-hmm.
huge here in Sheridan. They purchased 15 doe licenses.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so they had 15 doe licenses. Their members went out and filled those doe licenses. We used CSBG funding to process them and then donated
Mm,
all the protein to the food pantry.
what a neat idea.
Yeah. So
That
those
is,
are ways that we use our partnerships
mm-hmm.
to meet a need. I can't do that all by myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they can. So this is
Wow.
why our assessment and our planning and identifying partnerships and being creative. Well, here's another example in
Mm-hmm.
um I just lost over in Lincoln County. Um, they were having a hard time. They had okay food pantries, but
Mm-hmm.
hygiene pantries were a big problem. And so they partnered with their reproductive health and
Mm-hmm.
started purchasing feminine hygiene products for teen girls that
Mm-hmm.
couldn't afford it. So
Wow.
we could use CSBG funding for hygiene kits. They distributed them through reproductive health. They don't have to, they don't give, I mean, this was a faith-based one, so it was a faith-based pregnancy legacy center. So they were able to tell their story about, their abstinence and so forth, but be able to meet a need at the same time. So they don't have to give up their mission. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have to give up. They can pray, they can pray
Mm-hmm.
with them, they can do all those things. But if they receive CSBG funding directly, there does become a
Yeah.
limitation that we have to look at. Easy to get over. Very
Mm-hmm.
easy. We just do no donations of materials and
Yeah.
supplies instead of direct funding.
Yeah, that's where my passion's at as far as I'm just recruiting and collaborating with all the outreaches and stuff that I could possibly contact. Like this is the need.
Absolutely. Like
We have
I'm
this is
working with a lady in Campbell County with Gabriel's Project, right? And
mm-hmm.
with Gabriel's Project, using the Catholic Church, helping them support their diaper project.
Mm.
They can't take federal fund. Well, they don't want to take federal funds
Yeah.
because there's a lot of strings that come along with that, but we partner in different ways. So we
Mm-hmm.
can support the work that they're doing. So she tells me when they're getting ready to go to a county, I call Doug and say, hey, Gabriel's Project wants to come to Fremont County. Can you give
Mm-hmm.
her some contact information so she can set up her mobile diaper pantry?
Yeah.
So we help that way.
Yeah. And then I can be part of that committee or take over some of that job or whatever as part of the board or no?
Absolutely. We always
Okay.
are looking, and I mean, I can't speak for your board. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
but yes, those are things
Like
that the board is
that's like
touching.
I'm not stepping out of my bounds by taking that all on myself.
If
And
you're, yeah, right, because you should be a part of the assessment process. Let me look to see do we even have an inventory of all the nonprofits and the churches that are in the area and what are they doing? Do we
mm-hmm.
know? Maybe
Mm-mm.
there's not even a list of that.
Yeah.
That's something Doug has the ability to do. That would
Uh-huh.
be a very welcome thing that a board member could do as part of the ROMA process is
Mm,
making an inventory of what's happening in Fremont County.
sure.
Who can we call when we need help with a bus ticket back to Colorado Springs so somebody who is homeless can be with their mom?
Sure.
We have ministerial associations in Johnson County that's where I call. I need a bus
Mm,
ticket for somebody to get back to Alabama. Okay.
wow.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and every church has a different mission. Like I
Yep.
said, that Tree of Life Church, that's the automotive stuff, that's their mission. The
Mm-hmm.
Illuminate Church, their mission is business clothes or work clothes for women. There's
Oh.
always a different mission that a church has that's like, how can we support the work that you're doing? And how can you
Mm-hmm.
support the work that we're doing?
Yeah.
So it does go both ways. So
Yeah.
really cool stuff there. Okay, so we're going to
Mm-hmm.
get back onto here and
Okay.
on the implementation. Why do we talk about target numbers again? I just showed you on that sheet there where we talked about how many people we project we're going to see, how many people actually completed. We're seeing a pattern here in our planning. Roma requires us to use a lot of indicators, and many, many, many of those indicators are target numbers. And how come? Well, a target is that number that we establish before services are provided that say what an agency expects to happen. And this requires us to rely on past experiences with this programming. So target indicators are going to help us answer some questions. So selecting indicators takes time, it takes thought, and an agency staff in a data-centric agency is going to want to continue to refine these indicators until they feel they clearly explain the aspect of success in which they have interest. So an additional example of targets, also known as our projected indicators on this slide, add that percent of expected success and in that time frame. So we look at that first one, our target or projected indicators, we're going to guess that 40 out of 60 students participating in our after school program will improve their grades by the end of the school year. So we're not guessing. We're doing that because we've taken data for the last couple of years and we're like, that's about where that comes in. And a lot of people are like, well, how come it's not 100%? Shouldn't we go for 100%? 100% would be nice, but in the reality of life, it's not realistic. This is where we talk a lot about baseball. If you follow baseball, you know that baseball's been collecting data for over 100 years. They're very good at it. One of the things they talk a lot about is an RBI. And a baseball player who has an over 300 RBI or 300% is considered to be an excellent ball player. That means out of 100 times at bat or 1,000 times at bat, actually, they actually got on base only 300 times. We consider that excellent. In baseball, we know that because we've been tracking data for 100 years. In human services, we haven't been tracking data that long. We really don't know what is considered to be excellent. What we do know, though, is that 100% expectation of outcomes is completely and wholly unrealistic because human beings are messy. Human beings have choices that they make that we don't have control over. So while we can pay someone's rent and rent could keep them in their apartment for another 30 days, rent is not the only reason that people can get evicted. We can make sure that people attend our after school program, but we can't force them to study. We can't force them to take the test. We can't force them to do anything beyond what we're offering in our after school program to improve their grades. So by saying 66% of students attending our after school program will improve their grades by the end of the school year, that's going to be based off of historical knowledge that we've gathered over the years. The same is true for our job training program. We can say that we're estimating that 15 out of 30 participants are going to gain a job within 30 days of completing the training, but we don't know why. There might be other reasons out there that they're not gaining that job. There could be a lot of reasons. They may not have transportation. Is that something we would have to look at? Maybe we have to address that down the road. Maybe they have a language barrier. Might have to address that down the road. Might be a lot of reasons why they can't obtain a job in that field that we have no control over. So those are things that we try to keep in mind as we're setting projected indicators. So as we're going through those target indicators on a new program, sometimes we just have to use our best educated guess. We can look at national statistics, we can look at other programs, but sometimes we just have to guess. But why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we have all these targeted and projected indicators? Well, one thing is because we're required to by federal law and by the feds. But we can go much deeper into it than that. We do this so we can evaluate and our ability to analyze our data. We do this so we know how our services are impacting the community and if they're effective. It really allows us to have benchmarks for us to compare year to year or quarter to quarter. It's all about a part of our accountability. Why is there a variance? Did something major happen in our community? Why is only 15 out of 30 people getting a job? Is our job training program not any good? Are we not providing it in a clear, effective manner? Is it our curriculum? Did we not communicate with our community partners to ensure that we're providing the training that was actually needed? Maybe we made an assumption that everybody needed a CDL, so we provided that training, but in reality, we needed CNAs. We need to check in and we need to look at our data with those benchmarks in there to tell us and point us in the direction of our next ROMA cycle. And that is the evaluation or the achievement of results. So through that implementation, the agency has been informing the board every quarter about the progress of the agency. They're telling you how many services they provided, how many individuals or households achieved that desired outcome, and how much money did you spend doing that. In the org standards, boards are required to examine the program data at least once every 12 months. However, in Wyoming, the state office requires that to be done every quarter. So at the end of the year, we also do the same thing, but look at the year as a whole. The feds have us fill in the annual report, and we're going to be starting that process at the end of February. And the process is the same across the country by thousands of agencies. And we're going to be taking a look at that. So what's our role in reporting? Well, you guys are going to set the tone of this. Reporting should not just be viewed as a way to continue to fulfill a requirement of your funding source. Of course, that's an important part and it's necessary of doing business and it's important that it be done. But reports are also a really important part, an integral part of helping you know if your agency is doing any good. As a board member, you're not going to be engaged in the actual data collection or measurement processes, which we'll discuss in this segment, but you should understand what they are and why they're important. So if your agency is going to be data driven, as is expected out of all of our agencies, that culture that fosters that approach has to start with you, the board. And you have to demonstrate an interest in and understand the value of measurement and accountability and understand that these are a function of reporting. So when we look at this, a board has a duty to review and understand those programmatic reports, a duty to assure the organization has a system in place to track data, and a duty to approve and submit designated reports to those funding sources. So as we're going through that, there's something that I want you to remember, and that is because you're going to get a ton of data, is just because you count it does not make it useful or important. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. In the reporting phase of the ROMA cycle, the agency is going to be aggregating that data that was collected in that implementation phase. So remember, we talk a lot about how will you know in several parts during this training. And that's because you have to establish those measurement tools and data collection processes well before we get to the reporting phase. Because if you don't have those in place, you're going to have no data for your reports, or you're going to have nothing but data for your reports. And a bunch of data means nothing. Some of what we're going to be covering here must be a part of that planning discussion and the implementation activities. So what we're talking, while we are talking about it here as a matter of convenience, remember we said that all phases of the ROMA cycle must be integrated. So this is one of the places where that key concept of identifying those measurement tools and processes crosses over many of these different phases. So what are you going to get reports on? Well, they're going to start putting services and strategies into operations. They're going to start identifying how they're going to be measuring and documenting both what they do, which is in the process of service delivery, and then what they're going to be measuring about what happened or outcomes. So the process indicators are typically measured by intake documents, assessments, attendance, participation logs, or other agency documents, which can be paper or in electronic form. Sometimes they can be as simple as tick marks. But it's important to identify those measurement tools and processes that the details make the emphasis on documenting the program and agency results. If a staff stops with identifying the indicator without identifying how they're going to measure it, that is the tool or the proof, the process, how we're going to do it, then the focus on the outcome would just be lip service and not carry any actual meaning. So when we looked at that logic model, we finish it off with, here's the tools we're going to use, here's where we're going to store it, here's who's going to collect it, and here's who's going to report it. And that's part of the accountability, because we have to prove that the outcome happened. And if we don't do those things, it gets no attention. We forget that the outcome is what we're ultimately looking for. So outcome indicators require follow-up to secure that proof or the evidence that something has changed. So how do we know? Right? So if our outcome or our goal is increase in school success, and our projected indicator is, and we're going to guess 40 out of 60 students participating will improve, how are you going to know? You're going to look at report cards. You're going to look at test scores. You're going to look at teacher reports, because we have certain tools that we're going to use to measure outcomes, and the indicators are identified in this part. The board, your role here is to make sure that you have policies, that ensure that the staff has the guidance and the knowledge to put that quality data collection tool to work. You have to make sure that there are policies that address the how, the when, the who, the what, the why of data, that their collection in each program and each service and each outcome. So what's happening right now in Wyoming is we're currently developing a handbook that every agency can use and customize for their own community, that are going to have all of the ROMA and the organizational standards required for CSBG in there, and the steps and the how-to, the orientation. This is why we do what we do. We're creating that book right now for all of those agencies, and we're doing that not just for CSBG agencies, but we're doing that in partnership with the Department of Family Services, Wyoming 211, the Northern Arapaho Tribe, the Department of Health, and Doug is a part of that. Project Independence is a part of it. So there are all of these agencies coming together to say, a data culture, a fully matured data culture that can be easily understood by everybody at the agency, from the president of the board all the way down to the janitor, who all have a role to play in understanding the importance of how do we know we're doing the job, is going to be created by the end of this project year. So we're really super excited about that. So while we're doing our reporting, there are some things that we want to consider. The way our data is reported can impact the usefulness of the data. If the report that they're sending you is confusing to read, it's going to cause you to have more questions than answers. If there's too much data, you're going to miss essential elements, right? If the data isn't sorted, You're going to be flipping through pages to find out what you need to know. Many agencies now are creating dashboards to help visualize data reporting. Not everything is appropriate for this kind of treatment or this visualization. I can't talk. But if it's done correctly, it can really provide a quick way to share information and analysis as well as raw data. We really want to make sure that our quality of data is there. It's got to be accurate, it's got to be complete, and it's got to be right. Garbage in is garbage out. We want to take a look at the presentation. That's something that we'll be addressing in our data manual. We'll be talking about the usefulness of the data. Again, I'm going to go back to that quote from Albert Einstein. Not everything we count counts. Sometimes there's things that we don't count that really matter, and we need to understand that. We want to be able to make sure that our data is pointing us toward the direction of performance. Does it tell us the job and the outcomes and the performance as well as the service? Again, it is not enough to know how many pounds of food went out the door. I don't care how many pounds of food went out the door. I want to know what changed in my community, or what changed in that household, or what changed for that child because my agency provided food. So those are things that we want to make sure our data is considering or collecting while we are reporting. And then finally, we're at our ROMA cycle again. We're coming to the end, and we're coming to the evaluation phase. And this is the time for the board to analyze all this data. This is where we're going to review what happened. You're hearing me talk about that a lot, though, because as I mentioned earlier, at the end of each program year, the board is going to receive the agency's analysis of outcomes and operational or strategic performance. And at this time, you're going to probably be presented with suggestions that the staff have identified as necessary moving forward. And we know that the board has been receiving reports each quarter, and hopefully you've been reviewing that data and asking questions about that performance. So hopefully you're not receiving reports that simply say, yeah, 300 people got jobs. You know, I hope the reports are saying more than that, because as a board member, I would think you'd want to know, what did we do to help them receive those jobs? How did that process look? What barriers occurred? Were those barriers expected, unexpected? So this is why we want to look at evaluation throughout the whole entire ROMA process. We also want to consider who is involved in that analysis process. The board may have people who are interested in this kind of work and may participate in a committee designed to aggregate, sort, suggest, etc. It's not necessary for the board to be involved in actual analysis, but they do need to make sure that there is a process in place that includes staff or consultants with sufficient knowledge and skill to do the work. Because once the data is analyzed, the committee or the team or the lead staff person or the board, you're all going to come together to create those suggestions that could lead to improvements or to maintaining successful programs. And at the end of the day, the board is responsible for considering these suggestions and making all necessary decisions and moving forward. So what do we mean when we say evaluation and analysis? Evaluation happens at the end of the program. Evaluation happens at the end. After the program, service, or strategy is complete, once the plan has been implemented, after the reports are compiled and submitted. It's all about comparing with criteria, a set of standards. And in our network, we use benchmarks that we've set for ourselves to see how well we've done. So in other words, the plans you set for yourself have included that criteria that you're now going to use to judge how well you've done. Analysis, on the other hand, is ongoing all the time. So throughout this entire ROMA cycle, it's that careful, really in-depth study of something to learn about its parts, what they do, and how they're related to each other. It helps us to form an explanation of the nature and meaning of something. So analysis of data is how we learn. It's how we understand. It helps us to identify those decisions we need to make and hopefully provides us with the information needed to make those decisions. So once you identify the decisions you need to make, the data is going to help you make decisions based on reality and not on our personal beliefs, our assumptions, or our feelings. And as a board member, while you're not going to be engaged in the actual data collection or measurement processes, which we discussed in the last segment, or you might be involved in the actual analysis process that we're talking about in this segment. And you might not be, but as we said previously, you have to understand what the processes are and why they're important. Because if your agency is to be data mature or experience a data culture as is expected of all of us, this culture has to be fostered through the board. As I mentioned earlier, you have to demonstrate an interest in and a value of the analysis of your agency data just beyond just reporting, and understand that you're going to use this analysis of the data for decision making going forward, because the board is receiving regular updates about progress toward meeting the agency goals. This is the time to find out if they met them in the projected time frame and what decisions are needed as you go forward. Do we need to make changes? Are additional supports needed for successful programs? Do we need to hire? Do we need to let people go? Do we need to make a change? Do we need to make different partnerships? I mean, because once you identify the decisions you need to make, the data is going to help you make those decisions. So let's look at some of those questions we might be asking. Because analysis requires a curious mind. And you've heard me say all of these questions over and over and over again, because we ask these every quarter. We ask these at the end of the year. We ask these at our planning process. We ask these at our implementation process. We ask these because we want to know, did we do what we said we were going to do? And are we being accountable for taxpayer money? It's a lot of money that we're getting. We're being entrusted to make a difference in the lives of the people who live in our community. So we should have a curious mind about what we're doing. Did we do what we thought we would do? Did we do what we said we were going to do? And did we do it at a level of quality that is worthy of the people that live in our community? So we have to ask these questions. So one of the things that we need to do then is taking that analysis and turning it into action. Again, first, we have to start with good data. Make sure you're starting with good data. If the data is flawed, you're going to come up with incorrect conclusions in your analysis, and that is a waste of time for everyone, and it's going to produce errors in future actions that waste resources. Second, the analysis of your data should lead your agency to either maintaining or improving quality services and producing outcomes. So using information from your data is going to help you improve your knowledge about an issue. What caused that trend to turn? What else do we need to know? Because using information from data analysis allows you to make informed decisions. Data has to be turned into information to support decision making, because every day in every decision at the operational level, the board comes into play. While we always talk about the board not being involved in the day-to-day management, long-term strategic decisions are the responsibility of the board. And those decisions should be based on the analysis of facts that can be sourced back to reliable and accessible data. It's the application of this analysis to the agency's actions that are going to improve the service delivery, the management of programs and services, and produce better results for families and our communities. So once the data is analyzed and the decisions are made, this is going to lead us back to the assessment phase of the cycle. So the information you've identified should help you look at the way you do assessment needs for the next program year. What else do you need to know? Are we getting enough of the right data? Maybe there are data elements you previously included in the environmental scan last year that you don't need anymore. Or maybe there's new data that you want to collect that you've never collected before. Was anything missing from your previous CNA that we want to add in this one? Do we need to widen the area from which we collect information? As we've talked several times during this training series, the process doesn't always behave in the same way and in this neat little circle of cycle. Many times we move back and forth between these phases. Once we start implementation, it is not uncommon to have to pivot because we have to go back and respond to a situation or a community that demands our attention. Or maybe we have to reevaluate a program based on a loss of a particular funding or the loss of staffing. If our only Head Start professional leaves the agency, can we really easily continue on with Head Start services? Probably not. We need to evaluate what's going on. What if you lose your only highly skilled case manager? How your agency responds to opportunities or challenges often falls in the lap of the board. Having as much information and data about your agency, community, and programming as you can makes that ability to make difficult decisions even easier. So those are the basic things that the board has to consider before we can open the doors for business. And I'm going to leave this open for any questions before we move on. All right, guys, guess what? You finished. You are done completing your ROMA for tripartite boards. Again, I'm Susan. This is my contact information. For future purposes, you can always reach out to me with any questions, any additional information you might be looking for. Oh, I forgot to have my camera on. Any information you're looking for, please know that I am a certified facilitator. I specialize in strategic planning, focused conversations, action step planning, environmental scanning, consensus workshop building, training and technical assistance around CSBG, organizational development, UMB uniform guidance, allowability, unallowability of funding, lots of cool things that we're doing. We just got, and please, I'm going to, Christina, you might be interested in this. FCAG uses QuickBooks in Project Independence. I just got a resource for nonprofit bookkeeping using QuickBooks online that you might find fascinating. I am really trying to get Doug to take this because it talks about the differences between for-profit bookkeeping and nonprofit. Yeah, because there's a difference. Nonprofit bookkeeping and for-profit bookkeeping is different. It will help in tracking grants, how you're doing allocation of costs, breaking out bills. I sent that off to Doug, ask him about it. It's only like $150 for y'all to attend. You can take it together. It's super easy. It's done by QuickBooks Made Easy. I've taken it from this guy before. He makes it, oh my God, he makes it so easy and I absolutely love it. But I can also offer assistance and training around that. So I'm always here for you guys. I am here. The state pays me to be of service for you guys. I am here for you to make sure that you guys can be as successful as possible. I want to thank you for being part of this. I want to thank you for coming, for spending time with me. I know community action is my life, but I know board members have a wide world. CSBG and community action is a very small part of your world. So thank you for taking time to spend a little time in my space and learn about something that I find to be so powerful and that we are so blessed to be able to do this work. I feel it is a calling, and thank you. I really appreciate you being here and joining us. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing. I am also going to stop recording.